The storm had been growing for weeks, not in the skies, but in the deep silence between stars. On a small, windswept world at the edge of known space, Tarsus 7, the people had already buried hope. Once a thriving frontier colony, it now lay broken beneath the shadow of an invading force no one could name. No diplomatic probes returned. No reconnaissance drones survived more than a few minutes in orbit. The first images, brief, flickering transmissions, showed only chaos. Towering figures with flesh like rusted metal, swarming like insects across shattered buildings. Then nothing. A final burst of static. Then silence. Governor Holodrook had known the risks of his assignment. Tarsus 7 was a remote outpost, a place for dreamers and desperate men, where loyalty to human core worlds was always more ideological than practical. Yet when the skies split open and the enemy poured through, there had been no hesitation. He had issued the emergency code himself, command level black. A single cry for help, flung into the abyss, and then he waited. The wait stretched into weeks. Supplies dwindled. Civilians were crammed into underground bunkers that stank of metal and urine. The enemy had no name, but their presence was felt in every vibration through ground, every flicker of failing power. Rook wandered the command chambers like a ghost, shoulders heavy with the burden of survival. Every day he replayed the last images from orbit. Winged horrors feeding on fire, biomechanical siege engines crushing steel like paper. They had called for help. They had begged. No answer came. At first, there were arguments in the council. Some still believed a fleet was on its way. Others whispered of abandonment, betrayal. Eventually, the arguments stopped. The only sound left was a distant rumble of surface battles echoing through rock. But a signal had been heard. 3 weeks after the emergency code was sent, deep in the cold void near the Orion Expanse, the message was decrypted and archived on a secure channel within the Human Dominion's central war grid. 2 hours later, it landed on the desk of General Adrian Voss. He read the report in silence, jaw clenched. Tarsus 7 was strategically worthless. It had no major minerals, no trade lanes, no diplomatic value. But Voss didn't care about politics. He looked past the facts. To the audio attached, a fragment of a child scream drowned by cannon fire. It lasted 6 seconds. That was all. By the 7th, he was on his feet. "They're still out there," he said. His aide blinked. "Sir, people, civilians, dying by the thousands. And no one's doing a damn thing." A breath, then another. Voss reached for a panel and tapped in a code no one had used in 50 years. He wasn't supposed to, but he did it anyway. The channel hissed to life. "Prime Order Protocol," he said. "Activate Legion X." The chamber lights dimmed. Across 20 systems, something ancient stirred. In the subterranean citadel of Enoch Prime, alarms began to sound. Red glyphs danced across sealed walls of adamantium. Deep beneath the planet's crust, machines that hadn't spoken in decades began to whisper. Cryo-coffins hissed open with a noise like serpents. And from them, the angels of humanity rose. They had many names. Warborn, Thunder Sons. The Legion, officially, they were designated as Spec Ops Class A, post-human enforcers bred for war beyond imagining. Unofficially, they were legends, ghosts who came only when humanity had run out of options. Their armor was white like bone, trimmed in gold. Each plate etched was older than most worlds. Their eyes burned blue behind helm slits. And when they moved, it was like tectonic plates grinding forward. Among them stood Seraphon. He had no last name, no rank, not in the way men understood it. He was older than the Dominion itself, a relic from the first Galactic Wars, a living weapon tempered by 100 battlefields. While others slept, Seraphon had watched, always watching, always waiting. He knew what the call meant. He knew it was time. Within hours, Legion X was deployed. No Senate vote, no public statement, just movement, precise, absolute, and silent. From orbit, their warships appeared as daggers in the dark, matte black, without markings, cloaked in static. Civilians on nearby moons thought the stars had shifted. They were wrong. On Tarsus 7, the sky cracked open. For a moment, the defenders thought it was another enemy assault. Then came the thunder, a sonic boom that split the clouds. Fire rained down, but it wasn't enemy artillery. It was drop pods, screaming through the atmosphere like meteors. The enemy looked up too late. The first impact sent a shockwave through the canyon perimeter, turning stone to powder. Then more followed, each one bearing a giant encased in white armor. The Space Marines emerged in silence, weapons already active. Their rifles pulsed with blue fire, rounds that shattered through enemy flesh and bone like light through glass. Seraphon led them, his step slow, deliberate. One enemy creature lunged, a mass of blades and tendrils. Seraphon raised his bolter. One shot. The creature ceased to exist. Governor Rook watched the scene from the bunker feeds, hand trembling over a cracked console. For a full minute, he couldn't speak. Then he turned to the last surviving counselor, a woman named Mira Alvin. "We're saved," he whispered. But Mira didn't answer. She had seen the way the Space Marines moved, how they showed no hesitation, no emotion. She had seen one execute a wounded civilian wrapped in enemy tendrils, just to ensure full purge compliance. Save was not the word she would have chosen. In the northern mountains, the main hive of the enemy began to burn. It wasn't enough to kill them. The order was extermination. The Marines advanced without pause, even through blizzards and acid rains. No terrain was too harsh. No resistance lasted more than a minute. Humanity had answered the call not with mercy, but with fury, cold and exacting. Hours into the assault, Seraphon paused atop a ruined tower. His armor was spattered with ash and alien blood. Below him, the flames roared. Behind him, the Legion advanced. He said nothing. He rarely did. But if you could have looked into his mind, you would have seen only two words that had kept him alive through every war, every betrayal, every cry for help. Never again. And with that, he stepped forward into fire. The war for Tarsus 7 had only just begun. Snow turned to ash. The once pristine slopes of Tarsus VII's northern ridge were blackened now, streaked with craters and bodies both human and alien. Above, the sky churned with unnatural lightning. Storms pulled into existence by the sheer weight of warfare. The ground itself trembled under the advance of Legion X, their boots pounding the frozen soil in unison, a living declaration of humanity's wrath. Seraphon led the vanguard, his expression unreadable beneath his helm. The visor's blue glow reflected the inferno around him, but no heat touched the armored titan within. Behind him, Brother Calix swept forward, methodically cutting down the remaining enemy skirmishers with his plasma repeater. To their right, Varan the Redeemed moved like a wrecking ball, his power fist crushing a seven-limbed abomination into the ice. These warriors were not soldiers in the traditional sense. They were executioners. Each step they took brought with it the absolute certainty of destruction. They did not speak. They did not hesitate. Their objectives were absolute. Purge the enemy, reclaim the planet, protect what remained, and leave nothing behind. The enemy, for all its horror, was faltering. Whatever strange intelligence had guided their initial attack was breaking apart under the pressure. Where once they moved with eerie coordination, now they scattered like insects, driven more by instinct than tactics. Still, they were vicious. Razor-sharp limbs, acidic blood, hive-linked aggression. One drone launched itself in the shadows of a ruined overpass, landing on a Marine's back and puncturing weak spots in the armor servos. The Marine did not fall. Instead, he reached back, tore the creature in half with one hand, and kept moving. Far below the surface, Governor Rook watched the carnage unfold on shaky feeds. He had relocated the last of the command team to the secondary bunker after the primary was compromised by a seismic tremor, a tremor not natural, but triggered by orbital bombardment. There was no mistaking the scorch patterns on the horizon. The Legion wasn't just fighting. They were leveling. Mira Alvin stood beside him, her arms crossed tightly as she stared at the grainy footage. Her voice was hoarse from smoke and lack of sleep. "They're not just cleansing," she murmured. "They're erasing. They're winning." Rook said, "That's all that matters." But Mira shook her head. "What's left to save?" Rook didn't answer. He didn't need to. He already knew the truth. This wasn't rescue. This was retaliation. Far to the east, the central hive structure of the enemy still loomed, a grotesque cathedral of bone and steel, half living, half machined. Inside it pulsed the source of the enemy's mind, a biological core connected to thousands of drones. Destroying it would end the invasion. Legion X had no intention of negotiating. Seraphon stood before the hive's outer wall, now partially collapsed from artillery strikes. His squad fanned out beside him. Brother Calyx paused, sensors scanning the structure. Multiple heat signatures. Calyx said, dense formations. Defensive bioturrets on all levels. This is the heart. Seraphon didn't reply. He merely raised a hand, signaling the breach. They moved in like precision blades, slicing to the hive's defenses with minimal effort. Explosives breached the first layer, and within seconds, the white-armored giants were inside, weapons roaring. The interior of the hive was a hellscape of twitching flesh and jagged metal, walls that breathed and corridors that screamed when touched. But Legion X was unmoved. They pushed forward. Varan took point, his power fist glowing with ionized fury. He punched through a wall of chitin, revealing a chamber filled with larval creatures. Without a moment's pause, he triggered his flamer. The hatchlings shrieked and burned. Behind him, Calyx activated a seismic charge and placed it at the core strut. The timer began its countdown. 13 minutes to structural collapse. And still, the enemy kept coming. Seraphon cut down another wave with cold precision. His bolter barked with mechanical rhythm, each round exploding into gore. A claw grazed his armor. Superficial damage. He twisted, snapped the appendage, and drove his combat blade into the enemy's thorax. Every second felt like an hour. In the command center, Rook could barely keep up with the mission's tempo. Reports streamed in. Hive structures falling, enemy density decreasing, no Legion casualties. It was inhuman. It was terrifying. It was working. But it came at a price. Sensors showed seismic instability across multiple sectors. Orbiting satellites relayed warnings. The hive's destruction would collapse the mountain range above it. Any nearby settlement, even those untouched by the war, would be buried. Rook turned to Mira. They didn't warn us, he said. She nodded grimly. They didn't need to. Seraphon stood at the central node now, a pulsating mass of muscle and light. Pure intelligence fused with the hive mind. It shimmered with strange color, whispering not in words, but in impressions. Fear, sorrow, hunger. A child's voice echoing from nowhere. He hesitated. Just for a second. Was this thing truly sentient? Did it beg for life in the only language it knew? Then he remembered the burned villages, the butchered families, the bodies stripped of skin and left to rot in the cold. His hesitation vanished. Seraphon leveled his weapon and fired 3 rounds into the core. The hive began to scream. Outside, the mountains rumbled. From orbit, the site flared with heat, a bloom of destruction miles wide. Drones crumpled mid-flight. Structures collapsed. The northern continent of Tarsus 7 shook, as if the planet itself were mourning. Inside the hive, alarms rang out. Calyx was already signaling extraction, but Seraphon stayed. He watched the collapse begin, the flesh walls tearing themselves apart, the core melting into liquid light. He didn't leave until the last minute. A dropship tore through the dust clouds, engines screaming. The ramp opened, Legion X boarded in silence. No words of victory. No shouts of triumph. Just the quiet hum of war machines returning home. From the bunker, Rook watched their silhouette rise into the clouds, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to sit. He exhaled long and slow. They did it, he said. Mira looked at the screen, now filled with static. They ended it, she replied. That's not the same. Above them, the stars held their silence. But in the void beyond, new signals had already begun to stir. Not enemy calls, not distress signals. Warnings. Humanity had answered with total war, and the galaxy was listening. The stars bled red. 3 months had passed since the fall of Tarsus 7. The cleansing fire of Legion X had left the world in ruin. Its biosphere scorched, its mountains collapsed. But the hive was dead, and the cries for help had ceased. Officially, the operation had been a success. Unofficially, things were changing. Seraphon stood aboard the Sanction of Iron, the Legion's flagship, anchored just beyond the orbit of the quarantined world. From the observation deck, he could still see the flickering light of orbital fires on the planet's surface. They hadn't extinguished yet. Neither had the memory. He'd been summoned, not by command, but by her, High Inquisitor Valesia Arden. She waited for him in the ship's inner sanctum, a cathedral of steel and silence. No aides, no guards. She stood alone, draped in her crimson coat, the black rosette of the Inquisition gleaming like a thread against her breastplate. Her eyes, always sharp, held a different edge this time. Not suspicion. Concern. "You disobeyed extraction protocols," she said, her voice low but not unkind. Seraphon didn't answer. He didn't need to. His record was clean, untouchable. But Arden wasn't here for discipline. "You saw something," she pressed. His helm remained on. The glow of his visor hid the flicker of hesitation. "I saw war," he said simply. "No," she replied. "You paused. You hesitated before destroying the Hive core. I reviewed your vidlog. I saw it. That thing reached for you. Not physically. Psychically. It communicated." Seraphon said nothing. Valesia stepped closer, dropping her voice to a near whisper. "It was sentient, wasn't it?" The silence stretched. The Sanction of Iron drifted in low orbit above Left Prime, a newly established frontier colony that had gone silent 4 days ago. It was a third in as many weeks. The pattern was no longer isolated. Entire outposts falling quiet, their populations vanishing without trace, leaving behind only functioning systems and the gnawing sense of something watching. Seraphon stood in the war chapel aboard the ship, the flickering candles casting wavering shadows on his armor. A single prayer played from a hidden speaker, low and mechanical, a digitized echo of ancient liturgy. He didn't kneel. He didn't pray. He waited. Calix entered without ceremony, helmet tucked beneath his arm, the blue of his ocular implants glowing faintly. "They're here," he said. Seraphon nodded and turned. The chamber door hissed open to reveal Inquisitor Valesia Arden flanked by 2 black-robed acolytes. Her face was more drawn than before, her skin pale from long hours without rest, but her eyes burned with focus. She handed him a data slate. "Intercept from deep-range pickets. A fleet's emerging from uncharted space. No transponder, no known origin. But we matched the configuration." Seraphon read the data. His jaw tightened behind his helm. "Adapted human design," Calix said, grim. "Weapons arrays similar to our own, but built with hybrid materials. Organic alloys, fluidic circuitry. They've taken our blueprints," Valesia added, "and rewritten them." The enemy had not only learned, they were becoming us. And now they were coming. Within hours, the Sanction deployed a task force to Left Prime. What they found was worse than any of them expected. The colony still stood, intact and untouched. Power grids humming. Harvesters working. Traffic signals blinking in the dead silence. But every living being, 5,000 colonists, was gone. No blood. No signs of violence. Just emptiness. Except for one. In the central square, they found her. A woman, early 30s. Colonist uniform marked with administrative rank. She stood barefoot on the stone steps of the government hall, arms slack at her sides, eyes vacant. She didn't move, didn't speak, but her pupils were glowing faintly. Calix approached cautiously, scanning. "No heartbeat," he said quietly, "but neural activity is off the charts. She's functioning." Seraphon stepped forward. "Can she hear us?" Valesia's voice came from behind. "She's not her anymore." The woman blinked once, and her lips moved. "They begged for help," she said, her voice not her own. "We came in pieces. You answered in fire." Varen tightened his grip on his weapon, but Seraphon raised a hand. "Who are you?" he asked. The woman's head tilted slightly. "We were many. We were broken. You taught us pain. Now we are one." A low hum filled the air. Calix turned sharply toward the horizon. "Incoming." From the north, Figures approached, shapeless silhouettes moving with unnatural grace. Dozens of them, maybe more. Not the chittering drones from Tarsus, nor the mirrored scouts from Col Meaner. These were human-shaped, armored like soldiers, walking in disciplined formation. But they weren't human. Not anymore. The woman's mouth stretched into a smile too wide for her face. "We learn from your monsters." Seraphon gave the signal, and the Legion moved. The plaza erupted in gunfire. Bolts thundered. Plasma streaked across the square. But the enemy did not fall easily. Their armor bent but healed, their limbs shattered and reformed. One of them, a tall figure with a reflective helm, absorbed a full impact from Calix's repeater, staggered, then leapt 20 meters in a blur, slamming into Varan with bone-snapping force. The melee began. Steel clashed with claws, blades met bone, and cries rang out across the stone like war hymns. Seraphon moved through the chaos like a storm, blade flashing, bolter firing in tight bursts. For every one he felled, 2 more took their place. The enemy moved like marionettes, precise and cold. They had studied human tactics and improved them. Valesia stood unmoving in the center of the chaos, eyes locked on the woman. She activated a rune on her wrist and spoke into her vox. "Initiate Black Star Protocol. Orbital strike. Code Arden Omega." Seraphon's head snapped toward her. "We're still on the ground." "We're already dead," she said. Calix heard it too. She's right. They're broadcasting a neural wave. Subtle but growing. They're not just imitating us. They're assimilating us. Seraphon hesitated. For a fraction of a second, then he lifted his gauntlet and keyed his comms. "Sanction, this is Commander Seraphon. Confirm Black Star. Immediate extraction. Leave nothing behind." The sky answered. From orbit, the ship launched a lance of fire, a core-igniting beam of solar energy that tore through the atmosphere and struck the colony with divine violence. The air turned white. Buildings vaporized. The planet groaned. And the enemy burned. The Legion's shuttle broke the cloud cover just as the impact struck. The shockwave hit them like a fist, slamming the hull and nearly rolling the vessel midair. Inside, the surviving team members clung to their restraints. Varan bled from a dozen gashes. Calix's left arm was fused to his armor. Juno's helm had cracked, but her eyes still blazed. No one spoke. Seraphon stood, watching the view as left prime vanished in a bloom of heat. Valesia stood beside him, silent until the light faded. "They were never invading," she said finally. "They were hiding, and we found them. And forced them to evolve," Calix added. Seraphon said nothing. Back aboard the Sanction, they regrouped. Data was analyzed. The enemy's structure, communication patterns, combat evolution. All of it pointed to a single horrifying truth. The Hive wasn't a species. It was a process. Whatever intelligence had birthed the Hives, it had no shape of its own. It borrowed what it found, repurposing life, knowledge, and technology. And humanity had delivered to it the most brutal, efficient tools of war imaginable. Seraphon stared at the stars from a bridge. There were more signals now, dozens of them, lighting up distant systems like dying stars. Each one a call, not for help, for conquest. "We ended a war," Valesia said quietly, joining him, "and gave birth to a better enemy." "They begged for help," Seraphon whispered. "We answered with total war. And now," she finished, "they're answering back." In the dark, the stars blinked, and the galaxy held its breath.